7 stories in the Bible that still change lives today. There are moments in life when everything feels uncertain, when the weight of disappointment, fear, or unanswered prayers presses so heavily on your heart that you begin to wonder if anything will ever change. You keep moving, you keep believing, but deep inside there is a quiet question that refuses to fade. Does God still move in stories like mine? The truth is, He always has, and He still does. The pages of the Bible are not filled with perfect people living easy lives. They are filled with broken individuals, unexpected journeys, and situations that seemed beyond repair. These are stories of betrayal, failure, loss, fear, and doubt. But more than that, they are stories of restoration, courage, purpose, and grace. They are living proof that no life is too far gone, no mistake too great, and no situation too impossible for God to transform. And this is why these stories still matter today. Because somewhere in Joseph's pain, you may recognize your own silent struggles. In David's courage, you may find the strength you've been searching for. In Peter's failure, you may see your own regrets. And in his restoration, a hope you didn't know you could have again. These are not distant, ancient accounts. They are reflections of real battles that still echo in our lives right now. God has always worked through stories, not just to be remembered, but to be lived. So lean in closely, not just to hear these stories, but to feel them, to see yourself in them, because by the time we reach the end, you may begin to realize something powerful. The same God who moved in their lives is still writing a story in yours. Number 1, the story of Joseph, when God turns betrayal into purpose. There are wounds that cut deeper than words can describe, especially when they come from the people you trusted most. Joseph knew that pain. He was not rejected by strangers. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and stripped of everything familiar. The dreams God placed in his heart seemed to shatter in a single moment, replaced by chains and uncertainty. And yet even there, God had not left him. Joseph's life did not suddenly improve after that betrayal. He faced false accusations, imprisonment, and years of waiting. There were long stretches where nothing made sense, where every step forward seemed to lead to another setback. It would have been easy to give up, to grow bitter, to believe that his story had been ruined beyond repair. But Joseph chose a different path. Instead of allowing pain to harden his heart, he remained faithful in the unseen places. In the prison, in the silence, in the waiting, he continued to trust God. He served diligently, even when no one was watching. He held on to integrity, even when it cost him. And slowly, quietly, God was working behind the scenes, aligning moments Joseph could not yet understand. Then, in a way only God can orchestrate, everything changed. The same man who was once sold as a slave stood before Pharaoh as a leader. The same life that seemed broken became the very instrument God used to save nations from famine. And in one of the most powerful moments of the story, Joseph stood face to face with the very brothers who had betrayed him, and instead of revenge, he chose forgiveness. He said something that still echoes across generations: what others meant for harm, God used for good. This story still changes lives because it speaks directly to the pain many carry today. Betrayal, injustice, waiting seasons that feel endless. Joseph's journey reminds us that God is never absent in those moments. Even when nothing seems to be moving, He is still working. Your story may not look the way you expected, but that does not mean it has lost its purpose. Sometimes the very place that feels like the end is where God begins to shape something greater than you ever imagined. Number 2, the story of David and Goliath. Faith over fear. Fear has a way of making things feel bigger than they truly are. It whispers that you are not enough, that the challenge in front of you is too great, that you should step back and stay silent. The army of Israel knew that feeling well as they stood before Goliath, a giant who seemed impossible to defeat. Day after day they watched, and day after day they did nothing. Then David arrived, not as a warrior, but as a shepherd. He wasn't trained for battle. He didn't wear armor. By every human standard, he was the least likely person to face a giant. But David saw something others did not. Where they saw an unbeatable enemy, he saw a moment to trust God. And that made all the difference. David did not deny the size of Goliath. He simply refused to let it define his response. He remembered how God had been faithful before, how he had been protected while guarding sheep, how strength had come when it was needed most. His confidence was not in himself, but in the God who had never failed him. So he stepped forward when no one else would. The battle itself was brief, but the decision behind it was profound. David faced Goliath with nothing more than a sling and a few stones, yet he carried something far greater, unshakable faith. And with a single act of courage, the giant that once terrified an entire army fell. This is why this story continues to change lives. Because everyone faces giants. They may not stand on a battlefield, but they appear in different forms. Fear of failure, overwhelming obstacles, voices of doubt that echo in the mind. And just like then, those giants try to convince you that you are not strong enough. But faith shifts the perspective. David's story reminds us that it is not about how equipped you feel, but who you trust. You don't have to be the strongest, the most experienced, or the most confident. You only need the willingness to step forward, even when your hands tremble. The same God who gave David victory still meets people in their battles today. And sometimes, the greatest breakthrough begins with a simple decision to face what you fear and trust that God is already there. Number 3. The story of Moses. From brokenness to calling. There are seasons when the past feels too heavy to move beyond. Regret lingers, mistakes echo, and the voice inside whispers that you have disqualified yourself from anything meaningful. Moses knew that voice well. Before he ever stood before kings or parted seas, he was a man running from his own failure. He had tried to take matters into his own hands and ended up fleeing into the wilderness, leaving behind everything he once knew. What remained was a quiet, ordinary life, far removed from influence, far from purpose. It would have been easy to believe that his story had already reached its limit, but God met him there, not in a palace, not in a position of strength, but in the middle of obscurity. A burning bush caught his attention, but it was the voice of God that changed everything. In that moment, Moses was called to something far greater than he felt capable of. And his first response was not confidence, it was hesitation. He questioned himself. He doubted his ability to speak, to lead, to make any real difference. He tried to explain why he wasn't the right person. But God did not ask Moses to rely on his own strength. He simply asked for his obedience. And step by step, Moses said yes. The journey that followed was not easy. There were confrontations with Pharaoh, moments of resistance, and long stretches in the wilderness where frustration and doubt resurfaced. Yet through it all, God remained faithful. He provided, guided, and revealed his power in ways that no one could deny. What began as a story of failure became a story of deliverance. Moses did not become a leader because he was perfect. He became a leader because he was willing. This is what makes his story so deeply relevant today. So many people feel held back by their past, convinced that what they have done defines what they can become. But God sees differently. He sees beyond the mistake, beyond the fear, beyond the insecurity. He calls people not based on their perfection, but on his purpose. And when you respond even with trembling faith, he meets you there and equips you along the way. Your past may explain where you've been, but it does not decide where God can take you. Number 4. The story of Job. Faith in the middle of suffering. Some pain cannot be explained with simple answers. It doesn't follow a clear pattern, and it doesn't resolve as quickly as we hope. It lingers, stretching faith in ways that feel almost unbearable. Job's story is one of those moments, a life marked by deep loss, where everything familiar was taken away. He lost his possessions, his security, and even the people closest to him. In a short span of time, the life he had built seemed to collapse completely. And what made it even harder was this: he had done nothing to deserve it. That is where the struggle deepens, because it is one thing to endure hardship when you understand the reason. It is another to walk through suffering when no explanation comes. Job wrestled with this reality. He questioned, he grieved, he spoke honestly about his pain. Yet even in his anguish, he did not completely turn away from God. There was a thread of faith that refused to break. His friends tried to offer answers, but they fell short. They assumed there must be a hidden cause, a mistake that justified his suffering. But not all pain fits into simple categories. Sometimes faith is not about understanding everything. It is about holding on when understanding is out of reach. And Job held on. He declared trust even when his circumstances gave him no reason to feel secure. He continued to bring his questions before God, rather than walking away. That honesty, that persistence, became a quiet but powerful form of faith. In time, restoration came, not as a denial of what had been lost, but as a reminder that God had not abandoned him. The suffering was real, but it was not the end of his story. This is why Job's journey still speaks today, because there are people carrying silent battles, enduring losses that others cannot fully see or understand. And in those moments it can feel like faith is slipping through your fingers. But Job's story reminds us that faith does not require perfect clarity, it requires endurance. You are allowed to feel the weight of your pain. You are allowed to ask questions. But even there, in the middle of uncertainty, you can choose to hold on. And sometimes, that quiet decision is the strongest faith of all. Number 5. The story of the prodigal son. The power of grace and redemption. There are moments when a person walks so far away that returning feels impossible. Not because the way back is closed, but because shame builds walls inside the heart. The prodigal son knew exactly what it meant to choose distance, to take what was given, to chase freedom on his own terms, and to slowly lose everything that once felt secure. At first it seemed like independence, a life without limits, without accountability. But what looked like freedom began to unravel. The resources ran out, the friends disappeared, and the reality of his choices settled in. He found himself in a place he never imagined, empty, broken, and longing for what he once took for granted. And that's where something shifted. In the middle of loss, he remembered home, not as a place of judgment, but as a place of provision. Not as a place of rejection, but as a place where even servants were cared for. And with that realization came a difficult decision to return, not with pride, but with humility. He rehearsed the words in his mind, preparing to ask for nothing more than a chance to serve. But what waited for him was something he did not expect. Before he could even reach the door, his father saw him from a distance. There was no hesitation, no cold silence. Instead, there was movement, running, embracing, restoring. The son who expected rejection was met with overwhelming love. The one who thought he had lost his place was welcomed back fully. This is what grace looks like. It does not ignore the past, but it refuses to let the past have the final word. It reaches beyond failure, beyond regret, and offers restoration that cannot be earned. This is why this story continues to change lives. Because so many carry the weight of mistakes, believing they have gone too far to come back. But the truth is, the door has never been closed. No matter how far you've wandered, no matter how much you feel you've lost, there is still a way back. And not to a place of condemnation, but to a place of love. The kind of love that sees you from a distance and runs toward you anyway. Number 6. The story of Peter. Failure is not the end. There is a unique kind of pain that comes from failing in a moment that mattered most. Not a small mistake, but a defining moment where fear takes over and you become someone you never thought you would be. Peter faced that moment on a night he would never forget. He had been bold before, confident, outspoken, certain of his loyalty. He believed he would stand firm no matter what came. But when the pressure rose, when fear closed in and the cost became real, his courage faltered. 3 times he denied even knowing Jesus, and the weight of that failure hit immediately. It wasn't just what he said, it was what it meant. The realization that when it mattered most, he had fallen short. That kind of regret doesn't fade quickly. It lingers, replaying the moment over and over, convincing you that you've lost something that cannot be restored. Peter knew that feeling, but his story did not end there. After the resurrection, there was a moment, quiet, personal, intentional, where Jesus met Peter again. There was no public shame, no harsh rejection. Instead, there was a question repeated 3 times, mirroring the 3 denials. Do you love me? It was not just a question, it was an invitation to be restored. With each answer, something broken was being rebuilt. The failure was not ignored, but it was transformed. Peter was not cast aside. He was entrusted with purpose. The one who had denied became the one who would boldly stand and lead. This is why Peter's story still speaks with power today. Because failure has a way of convincing you that you are finished, that your mistakes define you, that you can never step forward again with the same purpose or confidence. But Peter's life proves otherwise. Failure is not the end when grace steps in. It can become a turning point instead of a stopping point, a place where humility grows, where dependence on God deepens, where strength is rebuilt in a way that is more grounded and real. You are not disqualified because you fell. What matters is what happens next. And just like Peter, restoration is still possible. Number 7. The story of the woman at the well, seen, known, and transformed. There is a kind of loneliness that exists even in the presence of others. A quiet isolation that comes from feeling misunderstood, judged, or pushed aside. The woman at the well lived in that space. She moved through her days carrying a history that others defined her by, a reputation that followed her wherever she went. So she chose a different time to draw water, avoiding the crowds, avoiding the whispers. It was in that ordinary, unnoticed moment that everything changed. Jesus met her there, not in a place of honor or recognition, but in the middle of her routine. And what stands out is not just that he spoke to her, but how he spoke to her. He did not begin with accusation. He began with connection. He saw her, not as others saw her, but with a depth that reached beyond her past. And yet he did not ignore her story. He gently revealed that he knew everything, every relationship, every broken piece, every attempt to fill a deeper thirst. This could have been the moment she turned away, overwhelmed by being fully known. But something different happened. Instead of rejection, she encountered truth wrapped in grace. She realized she was not being exposed to be condemned, but to be restored. In that conversation, something awakened within her. The thirst she had been trying to satisfy through temporary things was finally addressed at its source. Jesus spoke of living water, a life, a fulfillment, a connection with God that would not run dry, and she believed. The woman who came to the well alone left with a purpose. She returned to the very people she had been avoiding and began to speak boldly about what had happened. Her story, once marked by shame, became a testimony that drew others to seek the same encounter. This is why her story still changes lives today, because there are so many who feel unseen, defined by their past, convinced that their story disqualifies them from something greater. But this moment at the well reveals a different truth. You are seen fully, known completely, and still invited into transformation. One encounter with God can shift everything, not by erasing your past, but by redefining your identity beyond it. The same voice that called her into new life still speaks today, into hidden places, into quiet struggles, into hearts that are searching for something more. Conclusion: when these stories become your story, these are not just stories to be admired from a distance. They are reflections of something deeper, evidence that God moves in real lives, in real struggles, in ways that are both personal and powerful, across different times, different circumstances, and different kinds of people. One truth remains constant: God does not abandon the story he begins. Joseph reminds us that betrayal is not the end. David shows us that fear does not have the final word. Moses reveals that the past does not cancel a calling. Job teaches that faith can endure even when understanding fades. The prodigal son shows that no distance is too far for grace to reach. Peter proves that failure can be restored. And the woman at the well reveals that being fully known does not lead to rejection, but to transformation. And somewhere within these stories there is a place where your life connects. Maybe you are in a season of waiting, where nothing seems to be moving. Maybe you are facing something that feels too big to overcome. Maybe you carry regret or questions, or a quiet longing for something more. Whatever your situation looks like right now, these stories are not distant echoes. They are reminders. The same God is still present. He still restores what feels broken. He still calls people forward despite their doubts. He still meets hearts in hidden places and brings them into something new. His work is not limited to the past. It continues even now, often in ways that are unseen at first. Your story is still being written, and just like those who came before, it may not follow the path you expected. There may be moments of uncertainty, of struggle, of waiting, but none of those moments are wasted when placed in God's hands. He weaves them together with purpose, shaping something that reaches beyond what you can currently see. So hold on to that truth, because the same God who changed their lives is still able to change yours.